He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
When it comes to saving money, this is possibly a new idea for some of us.
Never. That's the answer for you. Never done that, no.
No.
But once you give it a try, it can open up a world of possibility
Yeah, I've done it once with onions.
and help you save on your food budget. I'm talking about foraging.
So when the season's over and the farmers don't want them anymore, you're allowed to go in the field and then just grab some of the uglier ones.
I've got a friend that's a great forager. And I mean, especially being in Canterbury too, you've got the red zone.
The red zone's land from which homes were removed after being badly damaged in Christchurch's 2010 and 2011 earthquakes.
And there are heaps of fruit trees in the red zone.
Kia ora, I'm Katy Gosset and welcome to Thrift. Our saying for this episode is a whakatauki, or Māori proverb. He kai ke aku ringa. There is food in my hands. It's also often interpreted more broadly as meaning we have the ability to be resilient. In the case of foraging, both meanings hold. We can take steps to supplement our food budget, and there is kai within reach. It may just be a matter of finding it.
So quite a few of the trees are fairly old now, anywhere from 10 to 30, 40 years old even.
We mentioned the Christchurch red zone there. I'm taking a stroll through it with local forager Peter Langlands.
With a big sort of wedge of land left over after the earthquakes with lots of different types of trees.
So where we're wandering at the moment, in fact, would have been people's gardens, basically.
Yeah, it would have been, yeah. Just different people's sort of preferences really with what's here. It sort of adds a real element of surprise with what we'll find.
Peter's a well-known photographer, researcher and writer who specialises in freshwater and marine issues. But in this ep, he's got his foraging hat on, literally, which was a smart move because it's a hot day and already I'm getting burnt. Peter leads foraging tours, a bit like what he's taking me on. He's written a book, which we'll come to soon, and he's also worked with top restaurants, helping them curate special menus involving wild foraged foods. It's a skill he's been cultivating since childhood.
Just spent lots of time in the outdoors really, a bit like Borga the woodsman. A lot of time in the high country with my parents when I was young. So memories of gooseberries, wild spearmint, wild apple. It really burns on your mind if you can relate a memory to something you've eaten. It really reinforces and adds depth to the memory.
And coming back to that whakatauki about resilience.
To go out foraging and escape into your own world, but actually be able to produce something from that experience is really powerful and enriching.
It's also something that can help out when money's tight.
Certainly for younger people and students and people who are travelling, it can definitely help with the food budget. When you learn young, it's a really good sort of life skill.
Well, I didn't learn to forage when I was young, but I guess it's never too late to learn new tricks. So the first group of tips from Peter is about where to start looking. Here we're not far from the river, and damp areas can often yield good foraging.
We often spend a lot of time foraging around river edges and spring creeks.
Foragers also look for spots where there's diverse plant life. So as Peter casts his eye around,
probably the silver birch tree is worth looking at because we get a type of mushroom called a birch bolete mushroom growing around the silver birch tree.
Should we have a wee nosy?
Yeah, have a look here.
So it's about finding microclimates, or what Peter calls edge zones, where plants can grow alongside each other.
So the grass is nice and damp around the tree, so the tree creates its own sort of microclimate, and it's always sort of exciting finding the first mushroom of the new season.
Will today be the day? Let's wait and see. And let's not also forget that many mushrooms are poisonous. We'll come back to mushrooms and the safety around hunting for them shortly. But wherever you live, over time you'll work out the best places for different types of foraging, as Peter's done here in Christchurch.
You go down to South Shore, New Bryden's really good, and then of course you've got all the valleys and microclimates on Port Hills. So we're really looking just for that diversity in the landscape.
And cultural diversity also brings a wide range of foods to forage.
Being the second largest city in New Zealand, we've just got lots of things that people were planted, and a lot of things escape. People will dump stuff on the beach or on a riverbank, and it will just naturally spread along those edge zones.
And further afield, it's also worth checking out places where people have settled in the past.
Areas where you might have had gold miners, loggers, different types of farming, where there's been a diversity of people in the landscape is where we'll find a lot of good foraging.
So that's the where. Now for the what to eat. Peter reckons there are thousands of edible species in New Zealand. You don't want to get daunted, so start small.
Taking the time, just learn 2 or 3 species each week, and then by the course of the end of the year, you'll have a good repertoire of species to forage, really.
In fact, one of your first foraged plants might be something that's already in your backyard.
Dandelion greens are really good, just highly nutritious. Yeah, just really good to use as a sort of salad green if you wilt them with a squeeze of lemon.
Now, I have heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that all of the dandelion plant can be used. Is that right?
Yeah, the whole plant, yeah. So you can use the root, the leaves and the flowers.
In fact, Peter grabs some leaves to nibble on as we pass a dandelion.
It's always good just to eat a few leaves raw for health, really, just for the antioxidants.
As we're wandering along in an area which, as I say, used to all be people's gardens, I noticed there are lots of fruit trees, and it's nice to see the blossoms are out.
This looks like a cherry blossom, so we can actually use the cherry blossoms for making flavour-infused syrups, just sort of reducing down with a little bit of sugar.
So are these sweet?
Sort of more of a marzipan flavour, but it will vary a lot between different types of the trees as well.
You should always identify exactly which blossom you're dealing with, and we'll look more at how to do that shortly. But Peter says many blossoms in New Zealand are used in food preparation.
Apricot blossoms, cherry blossom, apple blossoms are all used for making aromatic flavoured vinegars and also syrups.
In fact, Peter says when it comes to foraging, Canterbury's known for its fruit trees and its elderflowers.
We think of them as being a weed and very common, but actually when you get into the upper half of the North Island, they're virtually non-existent. Used to forage for a restaurant in Auckland, which was large amounts of elderflower, and they made a beautiful vinegar out of it.
Once you've built up a few plants you know how to identify, come prepared for collection.
Having a chili bin in the car with an ice pad so you can keep things fresh. Having some storage containers just to keep them in good condition.
So we've talked a bit about where to go, what to find. Tip 2, what should you stay away from?
Anywhere you're not certain of the historic land use.
That's because of potential pollution.
A lot of flat areas of ground could possibly be historic landfill sites. Also avoiding anywhere close to industrial areas where landfill may have been dumped. Busy road margins and areas where there's lots of regular spraying are probably best avoided.
Even areas that appear natural.
In some cases where native tree plantings are done is actually the application of lots of herbicides, so those are sort of areas to avoid foraging.
The other thing is stay in areas where you're legally allowed to be. Don't go onto private property unless you have permission. And while we're on the subject, community law confirms that any fruit hanging over a private fence into a public space still belongs to the tree's owner. Then, of course, there are actual species you want to avoid.
So this is a yew tree actually, which is one of the poisonous trees we have in New Zealand.
This is definitely one to stay away from.
50 grams of yew tree leaves could be lethal. It causes cardiac dysrhythmia, so we have to be really careful with this one.
When it comes to risky foraging finds, a lot of you are probably thinking about mushrooms. And finding fungi can be a real thrill for experienced foragers.
Getting a big haul of porcini mushrooms is really where it's at for me, just because of the amazing flavour of porcini mushrooms. There's a real sort of gold rush element with the porcini.
But of course mushrooms can be deadly, and Peter says there's only a small percentage of fungi in New Zealand that are edible.
You need to be 100% sure of identifying mushrooms. As we say, there's not much room for error.
Which brings us to an important part of the whole foraging experience, safety. When you start out, it's a good idea to go with someone who's experienced. Learn what different plants look like in different stages of growth, so you can distinguish between them and other similar plants. Also learn where a particular plant grows, so if you think you found it and then it's outside that habitat, that could be a red flag that the plant is not what you think it is. You can also use online resources to identify what you found.
What I normally do if I'm not 100% sure of identification is take a photo and put it on iNaturalist.
iNaturalist is a social network where people share information about biodiversity.
I'm a bit of a species hunter, so I really enjoy the natural biodiversity.
He's hoping to list 10,000 species on the site.
That's my sort of life goal really, and I'm up to about 1,000 now. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get there.
But importantly, iNaturalist is also a crowdsourced system for identifying things you found.
You'll get a series of people reviewing your photos, and it will reach what's called a research grade, which is pretty much 100% sure accurate identification. So you've actually got a certified identification of what you've found.
There are other ways of trying to identify what you found online, although Peter warns you can't be sure they're accurate.
Just taking a photograph on your phone and use the camera icon on Google, upload a photo onto Google Lens, and then look at the Google search. That will generally be about 90% accurate, not 100%, so not reliable, but it's a good first step.
And Peter has created his own valuable resource for foragers. He has a personal database of 7,500 native species. Of those, 250 wild plants, mushrooms and seaweeds feature in his book, Foraging New Zealand.
We really did, for 4 years of researching Foraging New Zealand, concisely sort of work through all the key aspects of foraging, from the field skills to the 250 species, and then also ways of preparing foraged foods as well.
There are other books and numerous websites devoted to foraging in New Zealand, as well as foraging tours organised in different parts of the country, all good resources. But if you're in any doubt about something you found and you haven't been able to absolutely verify it, leave it behind.
Once you've got a handle on where to go, where not to go, and you're starting to make some finds, tip 3 is about sharing that bounty.
Taking things in moderation, just keeping it sensible really to what you're going to use in the near future.
Now, there are some species here in the red zone where there's plenty for all.
A lifetime supply of bay leaves on this tree here. Bay laurel's really nice, just for adding flavour to soups and stocks.
Just remember to dry the leaves out first. But of course, whereas with bay leaves you really only need 1 or 2 in a meal, with some other trees they can get stripped out as times get a bit tighter and foraging becomes more popular.
A lot of people have got into foraging in the last 5 years. It really has sort of taken off.
For that reason, a lot of foraging groups try to stick to a rule of thirds. So take 1/3 for yourself, leave another third for others, and leave the remainder so the tree or plant can regenerate. Peter also suggests that if you choose and prepare some species carefully, they can last for ages.
You could easily get enough wakame seaweed in a half an hour to last you a year. I mean, you just really like to use radial dehydrators for seaweeds and fruit, so they last all year round.
You could also check out episode 2 of our last season. That was all to do with pickling and preserving, another great way to make your foraged foods last the distance.
Bottling, drying, making vinegars, pickling, all those methods, fermentations as well, allow you to store and continue the bounty through the whole year.
One final way to preserve some of these precious foraged foods for the future is to start growing them again.
You can actually bring in a lot of species from the wild and actually grow them in gardens. Someone has actually written a book about foraging wild plants and putting them in pots in a kitchen garden. So we're starting to see a lot of really interesting offshoots from what people are doing with foraging.
So let's recap. When you start out, try to go with an experienced forager and just learn how to identify a few new plants at a time. Look for damp areas or microclimates and avoid roadsides and areas where you're not sure of the previous land use. Use iNaturalist, Peter's book, or other online resources to accurately identify species. If in doubt, seriously, any doubt at all, leave it behind. When you find something you're sure of, don't take it all. Share the bounty. Make sure none of what you collect is wasted by pickling, fermenting, and using all the foraged food.
Next time on Thrift, we'll be airing our dirty linen, looking at whether we can save money by washing our clothes less frequently. For that episode and others, make sure you follow us on your favourite podcast app. Special thanks to my guest in this episode, forager extraordinaire Peter Langlands. This podcast was produced and presented by me, Katy Gosset. It was mixed by Alex Harmer, and Tim Watkin is the executive producer of podcasts and series. If you have a tip to share, you can email us at thrift@rnz.co.nz. Thanks for joining us. Ka kite.